seat. As that bucket's being passed, Brenna, could you grab my podium for me? As those buckets are being passed today, I want to just remind you, if you haven't been following along, we've got a pretty cool thing going on Christmas Eve. I also want to say what's up to all those who are joining us online. Thank you for being with us today. Grateful to have you as a part of our family here. And we look forward to the day with you being able to arrive, being here in person. I think that would be awesome. But this Christmas Eve, we're going to be gathering together. I want to encourage you to be here with us. It's at 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve. We're going to have a Christmas Eve service. And here's what we're doing. We're doing one service, which sounds crazy, okay? We're doing one service. It's going to be 1 hour long. We're going to pack this room out worse than it is now. There's going to be standing room only. We'll have an area for kids to sit, have the kids in here. It's going to be uncomfortable. But it will also remind us of the fact that Jesus came and put on flesh, born in a manger, and ought to be worshiped. And we will come together as a big family and we'll worship our King. And so that's going to be Christmas Eve at 5 o'clock. It's 1 hour. Prepare for that. It's going to be a good time. If you got a Bible, we're going to be in Ruth chapter 4. We're closing out our Advent series for Advent. We've been going through the Book of Ruth together, and to start this out, I'm going to kind of just do my best to work through the first 3 chapters in about 5 or 6 minutes to just get us up to date. Last week, I basically brought us through the first 2 chapters in about 40 minutes, and then focus on Ruth chapter 3 for about 10. Didn't like that, so we're gonna do a quick little context of Ruth chapter 1, 2, and 3 to get us to Ruth chapter 4, which I think is an incredible chapter for us. And so the book of Ruth starts out with this Jewish man named Elimelech, who's married to this woman by the name of Naomi. Naomi and her husband moved to Moab, and their 2 sons married 2 Moabite women. Then at some point in time, for some unforeseen or unknown reason, these 3 men of the house die. And in their death, they leave Naomi, who's a part of a famine. There's a famine going on right now, along with Ruth, who's her daughter-in-law, leaves them super vulnerable. There's no man to protect them. There's no man to provide for them. Ruth gives her life to the Lord like many people do in desperate times and in weird circumstances. She gives her life to the Lord and then decides to follow Naomi back to Bethlehem to get some help. When they show up in Bethlehem, by the providence of God's timing, right, Ruth finds herself in a field and meets the owner of the field, who's this wealthy business owner and businessman named Boaz. And so Boaz seems to take a liking to her right out the gate. He's like totally into her. And she comes home, tells Naomi about it, and Naomi's like, you met Boaz. Boaz is actually a kinsman redeemer, and basically that means that he was related to Elimelech, which was Naomi's husband who passed away, and because of their relationship, according to Jewish law, this man Boaz has the responsibility to buy Elimelech's land, care for Naomi, and marry Ruth. And so Naomi decides to play matchmaker. And if you were here last week, it was a little weird as she was trying to hook up Ruth and Boaz together. It involved some odd things, right? Cute outfit, perfume, a few drinks, little seduction, some uncovered feet. And Ruth then gives Boaz this green light, right? Do with me whatever you please. And since Boaz, though, was looking to build a great legacy and not just have a good night, he decides to not sleep with her, sends her home untouched until he can marry her. Now, the problem is, what we learn, is that there's a closer relative who's actually first in line to be Ruth's redeemer. Boaz is second in line. There's another cat who's a clown. He's out there somewhere that Boaz is like, I got to make this thing right. And so Boaz has to find this dude. He's got to cut some sort of deal in order to marry this young, beautiful woman who loves God and has a reputation in the community as being excellent wife material. And so Boaz is on the hunt, and every man understands this, right? Every man understands when you see what you want, you're going to have to probably finagle some things, work some things out to get what you want. Boaz sees what he wants, and he's going to have to finagle a deal. Now, all right, in Ruth chapter 4, let's look at this together starting in verse 1. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. Just so you're clear, the gate is kind of the city center of the community. It's kind of like a downtown. It says, and behold, the Redeemer, look at this, of whom Boaz had spoken, comes by. Talk about providential timing. Look at your neighbor and say, I love some providential timing. Come on. Love that. Love some providential timing. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend. Sit down here. And he turned aside and he sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here, you guys too, come on through. And so they sat down. This is how basically business deals were made in the first century, right? Grab some witnesses, establish an agreement, shake on it, go home, call it a day. Then he says in verse 3 to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought, I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. So Boaz is trying to sell him on the deal. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, because there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And the guy says, oh, I'll redeem it. Uh-oh. That's tough. Then Boaz throw some other things at him. Well, the day you buy the field from the land, or from the hand of Naomi, you also have to get this woman, this is Ruth woman, this Moabite. She's a widow, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer hears this extra term added to it and is like, I'm out. I don't want that Moabite woman I don't know. He says, I can't redeem it for myself lest I impair my own inheritance. In other words, I already got a plan for what I'm going to do with my inheritance. Now you're adding to my plan. I don't know this woman. I'm not down with this idea. I'm out. I don't think she's going to be happy when I get home. My wife's not going to be happy when I come home with a new wife, talking about we got to get her pregnant, get her a kid so we could keep the land and the family. I don't think she's going to be cool with that. So he tells Boaz, take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. It's like a handshake, but it's weird. It's like, take my shoe. And this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal, kind of like a handshake. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the other people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilon and Mahlon, also Ruth the Moabite, cha-ching, the widow of Mahlon. I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gates of his native place. You are all witnesses of this today. Then all the people who were at the gate of the elders, they said this, we're witnesses. And then check this. Then they pray for Boaz and Ruth. Why? So remember, Ruth was married for 10 years and had no kids. So she's considered barren. So the elders pray for her. May the Lord make the woman who's coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May she be fruitful. May you act worthily and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And what do you do after she becomes your wife? And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception. Thank you, Lord, for those details. Appreciate that. Some of you are like, TMI. I'm like, but the Lord wanted you to know what happened and how this works. Okay, but check this. And the Lord gave her conception. Honeymoon baby. Right out of the gate. For 10 years, she's married and barren, and Boaz gets her pregnant in one night. Dude's a sniper, right? Like Olympian swimmers, crushing life. And she bore a son. Verse 14, then the women said to Naomi, who used to be bitter and empty, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. When I first read that, I was like, how's this old woman nursing this kid? That's not what it means. I'm glad I studied it, because that would have been a weird illustration, right? But this simply means caregiver. She became a caregiver. She was a good, active, involved, helpful grandmother. It says, and the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, the son that has been born to Naomi. Naomi had lost her 2 sons, but this new child is like a son to her. It's a part of her. It has come from her. They name him Obed. That's a terrible name. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Aminadab. Aminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David, who later become known as King David. It's a lot in here. It's a crazy story. All right, I got 4 things for you. We're just going to run through these together. I think that the text is pretty profound today, and I think it shows us some incredible things. The first thing is this comes out of the very first verse. It says, now Boaz had gone up to the gate, and he sat down, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. God tends to do his best work through his providential timing. Everybody's looking for a miracle. One of the greatest miracles that God gives us is his providential timing. God is sovereign and he is good. He is always active, always in control, and all that he does is good. He is sovereign and he is good. So here's Boaz, and he's out there looking for this clown. I call him a clown because he had a responsibility that he was unwilling to uphold. Any man who's unwilling to uphold his responsibility, dude's a clown. And so he needs to figure out how to get in touch with this guy, how to find this guy. So he goes into city gates, he sits down, and who strolls by? The clown. Proverbs 16:9, the heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. Isn't it true that hindsight is always 20/20? Meaning, when you look back over the course of your life, as you get older, when I say older, I'm not talking like, I'm just talking about where you are today. As you look back over the course of your life, isn't it true that one of the things you tend to be most thankful for is God's providential timing in your life? It's that friend that showed up out of nowhere. It's that relationship that got established that I had no idea how that got established. They were just there, right? It's that job opening that all of a sudden popped up at the perfect time. It's that house going on the market at the perfect time. It's that offering getting accepted at the perfect time. It's being at that perfect time in history where all of a sudden my gifts and abilities could be utilized in society. Like some of you wouldn't have made it 100 years ago, but you understand computers. Or TikTok's a thing, and you got some followers. What would you have done 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago? God's providential timing is incredible. He has you here. Now, how did you get here? Have you ever thought that? When you look over the course of your own life, how did you get where you are today? When you look back in time, it's so beautiful to see God's providential timing. I think of myself. I wound up at Eastern Nazarene College, some little dinky Christian school in Quincy, Massachusetts. I had no idea what a Christian was. Literally had never met a Christian in my entire life. There was a guy who used to pray in a locker room before games. That's all I knew. I show up at this school. This guy by the name of Ricky Grant shows up at the school at the same time, shares Jesus with me. My life was completely flipped upside down and transformed. God's providential timing is often his greatest miraculous work. At Netcast Church, think about it. So years ago, I was working at Applebee's. Anybody ever work as a waiter? It's a great job to have, by the way. It's very, very helpful. Young people, you should work as a waiter or a waitress. It'll develop some skills that you need. You need, okay? Anyway, I'm working at Applebee's, right? I'm working at Applebee's. Beth and I had some Apple love. We were both working there together. And so I walk in one day, and I'm waiting on this guy by the name of Dan Bird, okay? It's your dad. And so Dan Bird is sitting there at the table. I walk up. He's reading the Bible. I'm a new Christian. I'm like, bro, I love that book. So I'm like, let me show you the part that I love the most. So I start flipping through the pages. It's like, can't find it. My bad, right? And so he invites me. He's like, oh, you're a Christian. I was like, yeah, I just became a Christian. You know what I'm saying? I like that book. The book's cool. There's a favorite part. I can't find it. But and he invites me to come. He's like, I'm starting a church. I started a church. I planted a church. You should come to our church. I show up at this dude's church. Beth and I are the only ones there. It's a weird church. It's like, what is this? What is this? But it was a church plant. He was starting it out right in his living room. So we get to know them a little bit. And when I tell you that Dan and Tara begin to invest in our life, disciple us, providential timing. I needed somebody to disciple me. We needed a couple to come alongside of us. And they loved us well. They cared for us. They were generous with us, opened up their home to us, made me read the Bible. I was like, ugh, what is this, right? All of a sudden, I'm falling in love with it. I preached my very first sermon at his church with like 9 people in the room. It was awesome. I mean, we used them as a guinea pig. When we found out that we were pregnant before we were married, we were like, who are we going to tell? Dan and Tara. Roll up at like 1 a.m. We're like, we have news, you know. It's like, this is not good, right? And so it was just, they were great. Baptizes us. He marries Dan marries the 2 of us, or performed the wedding, right? It wasn't like anyway. Performs the wedding, and then he moves with Tara and their family to West Virginia. And then a couple years out of college, Beth and I moved to North Carolina. We're in North Carolina. We kept a good friendship with Dan and Tara. While we're in North Carolina, I called Dan, and he's asking about, like, have we found a church yet? I'm like, there's these 2 churches that we're kind of interested in. We're looking at. One is the bigger one. It's like Assembly of God Church. Guy's a great preacher, but it's big. There's a lot of people there, and so I don't know if it's going to be easy to get plugged in or not, but that's what I'm leaning towards. And then there's this other little dinky church in the neighborhood. There's the pastor lives in our neighborhood. He's invited us. We've gone a couple times. It's meh. And he's, the churches that are meh. Some of you are like, this church is meh. No, it's not. We're a great church. Anyway, just kidding. We're not God's favorite church, but I know he loves this church for sure, okay? But so I'm having this conversation with Dan on the phone, and he was like, well, if neither of those work out, you should go and connect with my buddy, Alan Holmes, because I think he's pastoring a church in Greensboro, North Carolina, where you live. And I was like, shut up. He's like, why would I shut up? I said, Alan Holmes is the guy in the neighborhood who I've gotten friends with who's invited me to his little dinky church. And he goes, no way. Alan Holmes was like my roommate in college. I go, no way. Providential timing, right? And so we wind up going to Alan Holmes' church. Alan's home church grows to be a bigger church. It's no longer a little dinky church. It is a great church. And Alan kind of left off or took over where Dan left off. And Alan, there might not be another man in this world who has discipled me, poured into me, loved me, affirmed my calling as a pastor. Netcast Church does not exist without Alan Holmes and his church in the world. God's providential timing. When you look over the course of your life, what you will see is that some of the greatest miraculous, great things that God does in your life is providential in his timing. You want to pray all day for all sorts of things, but really, God is always at work. And what you will see when you look back is his providential timing. He's always working out his most powerful miracles through his providential timing. I share that with you because it's a good reminder. Listen to me. Many of you right now are in a waiting period. You're waiting. You're waiting for that right job. You're waiting for that right girl. You're waiting for that right dude. You're waiting for that house to buy, waiting for that friend that you need, waiting for that relationship that needs to be reconciled. You're in that waiting period. I'm waiting for that healing. I'm waiting for that positive pregnancy test. You're in a waiting period. And waiting periods can be tough. They can be frustrating. Psalm 31 is this agonizing psalm where David is anxious, he's exhausted, he's frustrated because of all of these different circumstances and difficulties surrounding his life. And he starts out in Psalm chapter 31, he's talking about how he feels trapped. Anybody ever feel trapped? Waiting periods, you feel trapped. He's making statements like, Lord, I know you've seen my affliction. You know my distress. You know the distress of my soul. Anybody ever feel some distress? He's talking about how he's wasted from grief and his strength is failing him and his bones are wasting away and how life is full of sorrow. Waiting periods, that's what they feel like. But then in Psalm 31, 14 and 15, David says this, but I trust in you, O Lord. You are my God. My times are in your hand. Listen to me. Your times are in his hand. The Lord is not done. He sees your affliction. He sees your distress. He knows your grief. He knows you're weary. He knows you're sorrowful. He's not neglecting your sorrow. A day is coming where you will look back and know his times or your times are in his hands. And they've always been. The Lord always seems to be doing his best work in you, but through his providential timing. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says this, he has made everything beautiful. Listen to this, in its time. Wait on the Lord. Psalm 27:14, wait on the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait on the Lord. That's the first thing. God's providential timing is often his greatest work. Second thing, okay, Christians, you need to be more shrewd in this world. So here's Boaz. Some of this is going to be a little controversial, but I'll break it down for you. Boaz is going to use a strategic negotiation tactic in business called salting the deal, okay? If you're a businessman, you may have heard of this. It's also called like the poison pill. There's all sorts of terms for it, but basically he's going to introduce this last-minute detail that makes the deal less attractive, okay? And so he's going to stay faithful to God in the process by giving this guy first dibs to what's rightfully his. He's going to make sure that regardless of what happens, the woman that he cares for is going to be cared for. But he's going to do it in a way that also increases his chance of keeping Ruth for himself. It's interesting that Ruth chapter 4, for whatever reason, there's a lot of details about Ruth and Boaz that we don't know, but for some reason the Lord saw it fit to give us like a transaction deal in a whole chapter. Why? I think the details matter. And Boaz is going to do this in a way that is shrewd. And you need to hear me say, it is okay to be shrewd. As a matter of fact, I would say it is necessary in this world to be shrewd. Jesus calls it like gentle like a dove, wise as a serpent. So Boaz agrees to present the Redeemer with the opportunity to purchase Naomi's land. But when the guy agrees, what does he do? He adds something to the deal. He adds a little detail in. Oh, it also comes with this bitter woman named Naomi. She's a widow. Oh, yeah. Don't forget about that. And after he agrees to that, he adds this other last detail. And don't forget, you got to marry this random Moabite woman and get her pregnant and so that the land stays in her son's name. And then the guy backs out. All right, he's probably married. He's thinking, my current wife's not going to be cool with this. Can't do the sister wives thing. I'm taking the loss. Why did he present it like that? He's shrewd. And being shrewd can be good and godly. So I share this with you. Because we're a younger church. All right, hear me out. We're a younger church, but this generation of believers needs to be better at this. You're like, are you really going there? I am going here, okay? We need to be better at this. Young people today tend to be so emotionally driven, so agreeable, so focused on, not hurting people's feelings or not pushing back and think that everything needs to be fair. No, it doesn't. Everything does not need to be fair. You do not want what's fair in life. You don't want what's fair. You want to know what's fair? Hell's fair. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. For the penalty of sin is death. Right? You don't want what's fair. You need to be a little shrewd in this world. And because we're so emotive and we're so emotionally driven and we're so concerned about everybody's feelings, and I'm not saying you don't care about people's feelings. I'm not saying that you don't validate feelings. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, though, there are moments in life where shrewdness is necessary. And the church, if we're not careful, we've become so kind of conformed to the pattern of this world that we've lost the art of knowing how to have integrity and character while simultaneously being shrewd and assertive in order to be fruitful and multiply and take dominion and advance God's people and advance God's purposes on earth as it is in heaven. Listen to me. Listen, we need to hear this. In this life, as God's people, as his children, you're going to have to do some things in this world. You're going to have to buy real estate. You're going to have to sign a lease. You're going to buy a car. You're going to have to let your daughter go out on a date. You're going to have to call someone out on sin. You're going to have to lead a friend to Jesus, make an investment decision, ask for a raise some money, try to buy something you can't afford, try to get a job that you're not qualified for. There's nothing wrong with these things. But it will take being shrewd. These are normal aspects of life that believers, they don't see them as spiritual, but they're very spiritual. Which means, like as God's people, we got to get better in this area. You're going to have to learn when to sit on information and not share too much. You're going to have to understand money. Stop making money so awkward. You have to understand how to make money, save money, give money, invest money, talk about money. Don't make money awkward. You got to get comfortable with being assertive. You got to know how to use body language and understand facial expressions and how to use your tone and your timing and comedy. You got to know how to talk or when to talk and when to listen and when to make the big ask. You got to know how to say hard things in ways that don't get you punched in the face. You got to learn how to contextualize the gospel so that those around you understand it. You got to learn how to use your generosity to see more friends in heaven one day and not let all of your funds terminate on just yourself. As a matter of fact, this literally is the entire point of Luke chapter 16, where Jesus gives this massive parable and praises, hear me, Jesus praises an unfair, dishonest manager for being shrewd. Not for being dishonest, for being shrewd. It says, the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness, for the sons of this world, this is Jesus speaking, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. Jesus like, it's not right that the world is better at this than we are. And then he says, and I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteous wealth. Meaning like steward your money in such a way so that when it fails, when people realize money isn't everything, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. In other words, like use your money in a way, demonstrate generosity in a way that makes it possible that when you get to heaven, there's some people up there that are like, yo, I'm here because of you. Like it's ultimately because of Jesus. Come lead them, it's going to be all. But you played a role because of how you stewarded your funds. Isn't that crazy? Shrewdness isn't sin. Sin is sin. Shrewdness is godly when it's done with wisdom and integrity and faithfulness. And we see that. There's a whole 9 verses designated to the shrewdness of Boaz. Third thing, redemption isn't found through the law, it's found through love. Redemption isn't found through the law, it's found through love. Let me explain this to you. Here's this unnamed man who's given the responsibility by the law of God, to redeem this family. But he's not willing to do what the law says to do. Why? Well, it's just not convenient for him. Sound familiar? Sounds like you, huh? Sounds like me? I know you're like, don't talk about me. What about you? Okay, me too. Sounds like us, doesn't it? Right? The truth is we're all like the clown. We're all clowns. Over and over again, we fail to do what God tells us to do. And sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes it's accidental. Sometimes it's reactionary. But we all do. It's like, okay, have you ever tried? I tried to do this earlier this year. Have you ever tried to go a whole day, without being envious, lustful, discontent, like a whole day, like 24 hours? Not gossiping, not condemning somebody, not judging somebody in a way that I myself would not want to be judged? Have you ever tried to go 24 hours? Not getting defensive, not being impatient, not trying to justify yourself. Like, have you ever tried to do this? How'd it go? Like, have you even, some of you are like, I ain't never even tried. I know. Because you're like, it's a lost cause, bro. It's a lost cause. It's a lost cause. Right? Like, I tried this with a group of men. I tried to do it. It was just comical. Because then we just we're like, there was like the little stuff that we were doing with just like envy and jealousy. But then we're like, yeah, I couldn't even not ream out my coworker. Like I couldn't, like I went for the big ones today, It was wild. And the whole point is that the law cannot redeem you. Love redeems. You can't lean on the law. James 2:10 says, for whoever keeps the whole law but fails at one point has become accountable for all of it. And so this is what we do as Christians. We're like, well, I'm not a murderer. You're like, yeah, but like you hate your brother. Whatever. Well, I'm not sleeping around, I'm not having affairs. Jesus says, If you look at a woman with lust, you committed adultery in your heart. Always bringing up Jesus. Okay. You know what I'm saying? Which is why Romans says, for by works of the law, no human will be justified in God's sight, since through the law comes knowledge of sin. All the law is meant to do, and all the law does do, is it points to your inability to follow it. And then it says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Jesus Christ. And this is the whole point of the story of Ruth. Ruth wasn't redeemed through the law. She was redeemed through the love of Boaz. The law left Ruth and Naomi, for that matter, what? Poor, lost, alone, hungry, desperate, depressed, bitter, worried, empty. That's how the law left Ruth and Naomi. And that's what the law does. This is why Christianity isn't about following the laws of God. It's about looking to the one who upheld the law and died for us lawless people. Ruth wasn't redeemed, but she was redeemed by the love of Boaz. And all of this is pointing to our need for Jesus. This is the whole story. It's pointing to our need for Jesus. The whole point of Ruth, the whole story of Ruth, point 4, the story of Ruth is meant to show us a greater story is at play. A greater story is at play. This baby born to Ruth was named Obed. Just a terrible name. Again, it's just so bad. Verse 22, though, says, Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. In other words, Ruth's son became the grandfather of King David, who was ultimately pointing to King Jesus, right? And so here we see the full story coming into full circle, where Ruth is this outsider, this pagan Moabite woman. She's redeemed by Boaz. Sound familiar? The love of Boaz. Who's the pagan outsiders? Who's the aliens? We're not made for this world. Redeemed by the love of Boaz, from who would come Israel's greatest king, King David, and ultimately the world's ultimate King of Kings, King Jesus. All of this comes to head when you open up Matthew in the New Testament. The very first words that come out of a gospel writer in your Bible, Matthew in the New Testament, brings all this full circle. So I'll explain it really quick. Matthew, many of you know the story of Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector who became a follower of Jesus and sat under his entire ministry, knew that Jesus' life and message had to be documented so that you and I can have what we have in the Gospel of Matthew, saw it was necessary to make sure that we have the good news, the story of the good news of Jesus Christ. The word gospel means good news. And when he sits down to write the gospel, he begins with what? The birth of Jesus, right? And if you ever read the Gospels, right? If you ever read the Gospel of Matthew, it kind of starts out weird. You could turn there with me. The Gospel of Matthew, it kind of starts out weird. Is he good? We good? I got money for him. If he needs some money, I'll give him a buck or two. I got a buck in the back. We're good? He's all right. And so what we see is in the Gospel of Matthew, like the Lord starts out the story of Jesus, right, by starting with something called a lineage or a genealogy. A genealogy. And it kind of feels a little weird. You would think that it would start in verse 18 where it's like, and Jesus was born in a manger or something. You know what I'm saying? Or like, but it doesn't. It starts out with the lineage, or it starts out with a genealogy. And this genealogy, actually, it's a part of the greater story. It's a part of the story. And it goes over 40 generations of names. But every once in a while, here's the thing that I want you to understand from this genealogy. Every once in a while, as Matthew is walking through each generation, he tends to go out of his way to highlight something wild. Some sort of weird story. Highlight some of the most impure, seductive, manipulative, immoral, scandalous moments in Jesus' entire ancestry. It starts out, Matthew chapter 1, it says, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. There's a weird story in that story, Abraham and Isaac. Isaac, the father of Jacob. Jacob has a weird story too. Jacob, the father of Judah and his brother. Salmon, the father of Boaz. It continues on. Boaz by Rahab. And Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth. And Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of David the king. Listen to this. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. That don't throw anybody off. Uriah was Bathsheba's husband and the man who David decided to kill after he got her pregnant during a secret affair. Thanks, Matt, for putting that one in there. You know, it's going to be an interesting day between Matt and David when they arrive together in heaven and start. Can we just talk about the opening of your book? And then it continues on, though, verse 16. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who was called Christ. And the question that you have to ask, the question that is forcing you to ask is why? Why mention people like Uriah? Like, that's the stuff in our family history that we won't really talk about that stuff, right? You know, we all got that stuff in our family history where it's like, mom and dad don't really talk about that one. We don't really talk about Aunt June. We don't really talk about Grandma Mabel. You know, like, Mabel felt like a grandma name, but then I know a little Mabel, and she's so cute and adorable, and I just felt really guilty about that one. Why mention Uriah's wife? Why mention the poor, seductive, scandalous Moabite woman with a past? Why mention Ruth? Why not avoid those names? He could have avoided those names. And the point is, Matthew is showing us that there is always a greater story at play. Listen, you and I are wrapped up in God's greater story of redemption. And this is why Christmas is so important. This is why Christmas it's not about just gifts under a tree. That's why we can't make Christmas about Santa making sure he gets down that chimney and have his cookies. Cool, get him his cookies. I think that's great. But the greatest gift is the Lord Jesus. Galatians 4 tells us, when the set time had fully come, his providential timing, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those of us under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. And here's why this matters. Here's why those names, Uriah, Tamar's in there, Ruth is in there. Here's why these names matter. They matter because it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what's happened in your life. It doesn't matter what your family heritage is. It doesn't matter what your history looks like. It doesn't matter how seductive you've been in the past. It doesn't matter how manipulative you've been. It doesn't matter how impure you have been. It doesn't matter the problems that you have. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter what your sin propensity is. It doesn't matter the sins of the fathers that were passed down with you and the things that you struggle with today. It doesn't matter what addictions that you have to deal with. It doesn't matter your sexual trauma that you've experienced. No matter what your story is, all of us are wrapped in the greater story of a Redeemer who redeems all people from all places and all times. And all of us are wrapped up in God's greater story of redemption. We are wrapped up in the story that was announced to some shepherds after the birth of Jesus, when they said, I'm bringing to you good news of great joy that will be for all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior who is Christ the Lord. And so this is what Christmas is about, and this is what we have to make sure we keep Christmas about. No matter how much they try to commercialize, this season, no matter how much every other organization out there, every other company, every other business tries to get you through their marketing to buy into what it is that they're selling. There's one who came to give that in which is free, salvation. He's freely giving of himself, a gift that will last for eternity, not just for the next year until you forget about it and get new gifts. And so today, it doesn't matter who you are, where you've come from, what you've been through. Today, if you do not know Jesus and have never accepted the present of Jesus and the presence of Jesus, then let today be that day for you, okay? Let Christmas actually have purpose and meaning in your life and not just be another tradition that you check off the list by getting together with some family and having gifts under a tree when you bring a big tree in your home, which is weird that we do that. But anyway, I love it. Okay? Let Christ be the reason for the season because he is. So let's stand together.